So let me also give you a concrete example that I hope you'll remember, and if there's anything that you take away from this talk, let it be this example. So imagine, or think of this question: how much of the Quran, take an average Muslim teenager or activist, how much of the Quran can this teenager read without being scandalized? What percentage of the Quran can be read by, I'm saying Muslim teenager, but you can, anyone, the average American, say. The average American reading the Quran, how much of the Quran can be read without being scandalized? I mean, that's, I think, a significant question that we need to ask. And I think it's a very low percentage. Because think about, imagine for a second, I'll take on this persona of this average American activist, Muslim or not, whatever, and think about the Anbiya, for example, the prophets, and think of each one and how scandalous or not that prophet might seem. So if we start with Adam, peace be upon him, Allah mentions Adam in the Quran. He doesn't mention his spouse, right, by name. Isn't that making women invisible? Isn't that a slight to women, that Adam is mentioned by name, but his spouse is not? So where's the gender equity and equality in that, right? It's something that these are the kinds of thoughts that might go through someone's head if someone was analyzing it. Or Ibrahim, right? Peace be upon him. What about Ibrahim, who destroyed the idols of his people, right? And is that respecting freedom of religion? Is that respecting freedom of conscience? Right? So how, if you read that, so forget about like these broader concepts, but think about like someone who's reading that, what would they experience? What are the thoughts that would go through their head? Or Yaqub, Jacob, peace be upon him. He's concerned with his sons, his 12 sons. Where are his daughters in all of this? Right? They're not mentioned by name. They're not mentioned in Surah Yusuf. So this is, again, something that contravenes the current gender equality norms that many ascribe to. Or there's this notion of privilege, right, in social justice. Who is privileged and who is not? Well, look at Yusuf himself. He was a prophet. His father was a prophet, his grandfather was a prophet, his great-grandfather was a prophet, and then he becomes the king of Egypt, right? So this is all privilege. And this is, again, how someone would analyze it coming from a social activist context that we see today. And I can go through so many examples. Suleiman did many things that were considered problematic by modern standards, many things that are politically incorrect. He was a king, so where's the democracy in that? And he didn't win any elections, but he's king, and he told a woman ruler to submit to his religion. Again, we see this kind of patriarchy, and we don't even need to get into the fact that he could control the wind, by the permission of Allah, so that's climate change. So there, I was also going to mention the hudhud. He threatens to punish this bird, so that's animal abuse. I mean, so many examples in the Quran. These Anbiya are all very politically incorrect. That might even be putting it lightly. And one final example, I have many, but one final example is Isa, Jesus, who spoke as an infant, and he's already speaking on behalf of his mother. His mother is silent, but he's speaking on her behalf. I mean, what's going on there? Patriarchy from infancy is terrible. So this is all tongue-in-cheek, and hopefully, it's not blasphemous, but you get the idea that if someone is reading the Quran, or imagine an imam who's teaching, he wants to teach about the lives of the prophets, like there's got to be some kind of cognitive dissonance that happens, that you're committed to certain norms and standards of political correctness and morality, and then you hear about all of these examples, and what do you think about that? Do you say that, okay, this is not relevant to my life, I'm finding highly immoral things, according to the moral exemplars of Islam? Where is that going to leave my faith? And I mean, there are so many other issues with the Quran, continuing on this theme, that you have some Muslims today who find it highly objectionable that Allah describes in the Quran, describes himself as huwa, he, right? Which is, Allah we know doesn't have a gender, so why is that pronoun used? And this is a big problem that people bring up. Even the concept of hellfire, Jahannam, is problematic, because why would God punish us for our choices? You know, what right does God have to punish us for things that we decide to do? And this contravenes this kind of sense of liberal, free agency and freedom of conscience that, again, we've all come to assume by virtue of being in this environment, being influenced by this ethos, going through this educational system that we've all gone through, whether in the US or even abroad. And we've been conditioned to have a certain reaction, and to have a certain sense on these issues, and that there's a big conflict there with our book. And not just the Quran, I mean, Christians and Jews have also experienced this to a great extent, because, you know, with their books it's even more problematic. And there's greater conflict there between modern liberal secularism and what you will read, for example, in the Old Testament, and to an extent the New Testament as well. So again, the problem is not that people are more educated and therefore they understand that freedom of conscience and freedom of choice or democracy are ultimate values by virtue of ratiocination and reasoning. Rather, these ideas are indoctrinated. There's a process of indoctrination. And that's something that I can't justify for you completely in this short talk, but I just wanted to, we'll get some sense of how we can break down some of these concepts and understand the process of socialization that is taking place and is causing this cognitive dissonance and the problems that we're seeing around us.